Marcus wiped the grease from his calloused hands as the rain hammered against the tin roof of his small roadside garage. At 42, his body ached from years of crawling under cars and lifting heavy parts, but he never complained. The garage, inherited from his late father, was all he had left in this world. It sat on the edge of town where the streetlights barely reached, and most nights, Marcus was the only soul awake for miles. Tonight was different, though. As he prepared to close up shop, he heard a faint sound cutting through the storm, a weak, desperate cry that made his heart clench. Stepping into the downpour, Marcus squinted through the sheets of rain, his worn jacket quickly soaking through. The cry came again, thin and fragile, from behind the dumpster near the road. His work boots splashed through puddles as he hurried toward the sound, his mind racing with possibilities. What he found made him freeze. Huddled against the rusted metal, trembling violently in a soaked pink dress, was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her lips had turned blue, her skin was pale as moonlight, and her eyes, those large, terrified eyes, barely focused on him as he knelt beside her. "Hey there, sweetheart," Marcus said softly, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "Can you hear me?" The girl's eyelids fluttered, but she didn't respond. Without hesitation, Marcus scooped her fragile body into his arms, shocked by how light she was, how her bones seemed to press against her skin. He rushed back to the garage, kicking the door open with his foot. Inside, he grabbed every blanket he could find, old moving blankets, a tattered quilt from his cot in the back room, and wrapped her carefully. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a struggle that terrified him. Marcus had no phone, no way to call for help at this late hour, and the nearest hospital was 20 miles away through flooded roads. His old truck barely ran on good days, let alone in this storm. So he did what he could. He started a small heater, positioned her near its warmth, and sat vigil beside her through the night. Every few minutes, he checked her breathing, adjusted the blankets, and whispered reassurances he wasn't sure she could hear. "You're going to be okay," he promised, though his own heart pounded with fear. "I've got you now. You're safe." As dawn broke and the rain finally subsided, the girl's eyes slowly opened. They were the color of honey, filled with confusion and lingering fear. Marcus smiled gently, relief flooding through him. "Welcome back," he said softly. The girl stared at him for a long moment before her stomach growled loudly, breaking the tension. Despite everything, Marcus couldn't help but chuckle. "Let's get you something to eat." The morning light filtered weakly through the grimy windows of the garage as Marcus prepared the only food he had, instant oatmeal and a slightly bruised apple. The girl sat wrapped in blankets on his cot, watching his every movement with those cautious, intelligent eyes. She hadn't spoken a word yet, and Marcus wondered if perhaps she couldn't. He'd known trauma could steal a person's voice. He'd seen it in soldiers who came back from war, in children who'd witnessed terrible things. But he wouldn't push her. Patience was something his father had taught him, back when teaching was still possible. He handed her the bowl of oatmeal, and she took it with trembling hands, eating slowly at first, then faster, as if she couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper meal. Marcus sat across from her on an overturned crate, giving her space, letting her set the pace. When she finished, she set the bowl down carefully and finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena." He leaned forward, not sure he'd heard correctly. "Is that your name, sweetheart?" She nodded, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. Over the next hour, the story came out in fragments, pieces of a nightmare that made Marcus's blood run cold. Elena's mother had died 2 years ago. Cancer, she said, though no one had money for proper treatment. Her father, consumed by grief and addiction, had grown violent. She showed Marcus the bruises on her arms, the fading marks on her back. 3 days ago, she'd run away when he'd come home in one of his rages. She'd been living on the streets, hiding in alleys, scrounging food from dumpsters. The night before, she'd collapsed from exhaustion and hunger, certain she would die in that storm. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, the kind of protective fury that surprised him with its intensity. He had no children of his own, had never married after his fiancée left him years ago when the money ran out. But looking at Elena's frightened face, her small body still shaking despite the warmth, he felt something shift inside him. "You're not going back there," he said firmly. "Not ever. Do you understand?" Elena's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "But where will I go?" she asked, her voice breaking. Marcus hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered the implications or the complications. He knew nothing about raising a child, nothing about the legal systems or social services. He lived paycheck to paycheck, often going without meals himself to keep the garage running. His home was a tiny room behind the shop with barely enough space for one person. But none of that mattered in this moment. "You'll stay here," he said, the decision settling over him with unexpected peace. "With me. I'll take care of you, Elena. I promise." The girl burst into tears, and for the first time since he'd found her, they weren't tears of fear but of relief. Marcus moved to sit beside her, awkwardly patting her shoulder as she cried, and wondered what on earth he'd just gotten himself into. Yet despite the uncertainty, despite the impossible challenges ahead, he knew he'd made the right choice. The first weeks were harder than Marcus had anticipated, though he'd known it wouldn't be easy. He converted the small storage room behind his garage into a bedroom for Elena, clearing out boxes of old parts and tools, scrubbing years of grime from the walls. He found an old mattress someone had discarded, carried it home on his back, cleaned it thoroughly, and made it up with the only spare sheets he owned. Elena watched everything with wide eyes, still hardly believing this was real, that someone actually wanted her around. Money became even tighter than before. Marcus had always operated on the margins, fixing cars for people who couldn't afford the fancy shops in town, often accepting whatever they could pay. Now he had another mouth to feed, and Elena needed more than just food. She needed clothes, shoes, school supplies. He started taking on extra work, staying up late into the night to finish rush jobs, skipping meals so she could have seconds. He never complained, never made her feel like a burden. When she apologized one night for eating too much, Marcus looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Don't you ever apologize for being alive and needing what you need. You hear me?" School was another challenge. Marcus didn't have legal guardianship, didn't have the proper paperwork, and Elena's father, though absent, still technically had rights. But the local elementary school was small, understaffed, and willing to look the other way when Marcus explained that Elena was his niece staying with him indefinitely. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, a kind woman in her 60s, saw through the lie but chose compassion over bureaucracy. "Just make sure she comes every day," she said quietly. "And if anyone asks, you're her uncle." "Understood." Marcus nodded, grateful beyond words. Elena thrived in ways that surprised them both. Despite the trauma she'd endured, despite the instability of her young life, she possessed a brilliant mind and an eagerness to learn that amazed her teachers. She devoured books from the school library, taught herself mathematics beyond her grade level, and showed a particular aptitude for science and problem-solving. Marcus would find her in the garage after school, watching him work, asking questions about engines and mechanics with genuine curiosity. "How does that make the car go?" she'd ask, pointing to a carburetor. And Marcus, who never considered himself much of a teacher, found joy in explaining, in passing on the knowledge his father had given him. By the end of the third month, they'd established a routine that felt almost like a real family. Marcus woke early to make Elena breakfast before school, usually something simple but nutritious. She'd walk the half-mile to school, do her lessons, then return to the garage where she'd do homework at a small desk Marcus had built for her from scrap wood. In the evenings, they'd share dinner, often just rice and beans or pasta, whatever was cheap and filling, and Elena would read aloud from whatever library book she'd brought home. These were Marcus's favorite moments, sitting in the warm glow of the single lamp, listening to her voice grow stronger and more confident with each passing day. She was healing, he realized. And somehow, impossibly, so was he. Winter came hard that year, bringing temperatures that made the thin walls of the garage offer little protection. Marcus did his best, running the heater as much as he could afford, piling extra blankets on Elena's bed. But he noticed she'd started coughing, a dry, persistent hack that worried him. At first, he thought it was just a cold, something that would pass. He made her honey tea, kept her warm, told her to rest. But the cough worsened, and then came the fever. "I'm okay," Elena insisted, even as her face flushed red and her body trembled. "I can still go to school." But Marcus wouldn't hear of it. He called Mrs. Henderson, explaining that Elena was sick, and spent the day watching over her, changing the cool cloth on her forehead, encouraging her to drink water. By evening, he knew it was more serious than a simple cold. Elena's breathing had become labored, wheezing with each inhale. Pneumonia, he suspected, though he was no doctor. The hospital would require money he didn't have, insurance they lacked, questions he couldn't answer about guardianship and custody. But he couldn't let her suffer, couldn't risk losing her after coming so far. That night, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He went to Jimmy's pawn shop on 5th Street, a place he'd sworn never to enter again. Behind the counter, Jimmy looked up with surprise. "Marcus? That really you?" Marcus nodded stiffly. "I need money, Jimmy. Fast." He pulled out his father's watch, the only valuable thing he owned, a vintage timepiece that had been in the family for 3 generations. Jimmy's eyes widened as he examined it. "This is worth at least $3,000, maybe more to the right collector." Marcus swallowed hard. "I'll take $2,000. Cash. Now." Jimmy tried to talk him up, to get him to wait for a better offer, but Marcus was firm. "I need it today. It's an emergency." 20 minutes later, Marcus walked out with $2,000 in his pocket and an empty feeling in his chest. His father's watch was gone, the last connection to his past, but Elena's life was worth infinitely more than any heirloom. He took her to the emergency room that night, paying cash up front, claiming she was his daughter to avoid complications. The doctors confirmed pneumonia, started her on antibiotics, and kept her overnight for observation. Marcus sat in the hard plastic chair beside her bed, watching the 4-drip medication into her small arm, and knew he'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. Elena woke briefly around midnight, saw him there, and whispered, "You stayed." Marcus smiled, brushing hair from her forehead. "I'll always stay," he promised. "You're stuck with me now, kid." She smiled weakly and drifted back to sleep, her breathing already easier. The watch was gone, but what he'd gained in its place was priceless. Word spread in their small community about Marcus and the little girl he'd taken in. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, it was impossible to keep secrets for long. At first, Marcus worried this would bring trouble, social workers, authorities, Elena's father. But instead, something unexpected happened. People started helping. Mrs. Chun from the Chinese restaurant began sending over extra food, claiming she'd, accidentally, made too much. Mr. Peterson, who owned the hardware store, dropped off a space heater one evening, saying he'd upgraded and didn't need the old one anymore. Mrs. Henderson at the school did even more, quietly organizing a collection among the teachers. They gathered clothes, school supplies, books, even a warm winter coat in Elena's size. When Marcus tried to refuse, overwhelmed by the generosity, Mrs. Henderson put a firm hand on his arm. "Marcus, that girl is brilliant. She's special. And what you're doing, taking her in, caring for her when no one else would, that's the kind of goodness this world needs more of. Let people help. Let us be part of something beautiful." Even his customers got involved. Old man Rodriguez, whose ancient pickup Marcus had been fixing for years, insisted on paying double for the work. "For the little one," he said gruffly, refusing to take the extra money back. Maria Gonzalez, a single mother of 3 who could barely afford her own groceries, brought over a bag of Elena's favorite cookies. "I know what it's like to struggle," she said quietly. "And I know what it means when someone believes in your child." The support wasn't just material. People began looking out for Elena in ways big and small. The librarian, Miss Patterson, started setting aside new arrivals she thought Elena would enjoy. The crossing guard made sure she got to school safely every morning. Even tough guys from the neighborhood, the ones everyone else avoided, nodded respectfully when they saw Marcus and Elena together. It was as if the entire community had collectively decided that this child deserved protection, and Marcus, by extension, deserved support. But not everyone was pleased. One afternoon, a black sedan pulled up to the garage, and two people in business suits stepped out, a man and a woman with clipboards and serious expressions. "Marcus Reed," the woman asked. "We're from Child Protective Services. We've received reports about a minor living on these premises without proper guardianship." Marcus's heart plummeted. This was what he'd feared, the moment he'd known would come eventually. Elena, who'd been reading in the corner, looked up with terror in her eyes. The social workers explained they needed to investigate, to ensure Elena's well-being and safety. They asked questions, took notes, examined the living conditions. Marcus answered honestly, explaining how he'd found her, what he'd done to care for her, why he hadn't gone through official channels. He expected them to take her away, to process her through the system he knew could be cold and uncaring. But after an hour of questions, something surprising happened. The male social worker, Mr. Davis, closed his notebook and sighed. "Mr. Reed, technically, this situation is highly irregular. But I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of kids fall through the cracks. What you've done here, it's not by the book, but it might be exactly what this child needed." They didn't take Elena that day. Instead, they promised to work with him, to help him navigate the legal system to potentially become her legal guardian. It wouldn't be easy or quick, but there was a path forward. As they drove away, Marcus pulled Elena into a hug, and she clung to him, finally beginning to believe this wasn't temporary. She had found a home, and more importantly, she had found someone who would fight for her no matter what. Time moved forward with the steady rhythm of ordinary life, the kind Marcus had never thought he'd experience. Elena grew taller, healthier, her face filling out as proper nutrition replaced the gauntness of her early days. She was 9 now, excelling in school, her report cards covered with A's and glowing comments from teachers who marveled at her intelligence and determination. The legal process had been long and complicated, but with the help of pro bono lawyers and support from the community, Marcus had officially become Elena's legal guardian 6 months ago. The paperwork made it real, but their bond had been real from that first rainy night. The garage had evolved too. Word of Marcus's honest work and fair prices had spread, and he found himself with more business than he could handle alone. He hired Tom, a young man fresh out of technical school who needed a chance, and together they expanded the operation. Marcus still lived modestly, still saved every penny he could, but now it was for Elena's future, a college fund that grew slowly but steadily in a savings account at the local bank. Elena had changed him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Before her, he'd been drifting, going through motions, surviving rather than living. Now, every day had purpose. He attended parent-teacher conferences, cheered at her science fair presentations, helped with homework he barely understood. He learned to braid her hair, badly at first, then with increasing skill, and discovered a patience he never knew he possessed. She called him Marcus, not Dad, and he never pushed for more. What they had transcended labels. The garage had become something of a community center. Kids from the neighborhood would stop by after school to watch Marcus and Tom work, to ask questions, to escape trouble homes of their own. Marcus saw himself in some of them, the lonely ones, the hungry ones, the ones who needed someone to notice they existed. He couldn't help them all, couldn't fix every broken situation, but he could offer what his father had given him, a skill, attention, the sense that someone cared whether they showed up or disappeared. On Elena's 9th birthday, Marcus did something special. He'd been saving for months, sacrificing in small ways, skipping his morning coffee, fixing his own boots instead of buying new ones, eating even more simply than usual. He took Elena to a real restaurant, not a fast food place, but somewhere with cloth napkins and a menu without prices. She was nervous at first, unsure which fork to use, but Marcus told her it didn't matter, that she belonged anywhere she wanted to be. They ordered more food than they could eat, and for the first time in her life, Elena felt like a normal kid celebrating a normal birthday. "Marcus?" she said as they drove home that night, the the streetlights casting shadows across her face. Yes. Thank you for not giving up on me. He glanced over, saw tears in her eyes, and had to blink back his own. Elena, you saved me just as much as I saved you. You know that, right? She smiled, that beautiful smile that still surprised him with its radiance, and nodded. They drove in comfortable silence, both understanding that words couldn't capture what they'd built together. 2 years ago, they'd been strangers brought together by a storm. Now they were family, bound by choice and love, and the determination to give each other the life they both deserved. Spring arrived with the promise of renewal, but it also brought a ghost from the past that Marcus had hoped would never resurface. Elena had been at school when a disheveled man stumbled into the garage, his clothes dirty, his eyes bloodshot and wild. Marcus looked up from the engine he was working on and felt his stomach drop. He recognized the face from the description Elena had given him, from the wanted posters he'd seen at the police station when he'd filed reports 2 years ago. This was Daniel Hartley, Elena's biological father. "Where's she?" Daniel demanded, his words slurred, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Where's my daughter?" Marcus stood slowly, deliberately, placing himself between this man and the door. "She's not here," he said calmly, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "And you need to leave. You lost any right to call her your daughter when you abandoned her." Daniel's face twisted with rage. "You can't keep her from me. She's my blood." Marcus didn't back down. "Blood doesn't make you a father. I have legal guardianship now. You signed away your rights when you didn't show up for the court hearings." This was technically true. Daniel had been served papers but had never appeared, and after a year of absence, the court had terminated his parental rights. But Marcus could see that logic wouldn't work here, not with a man this desperate and intoxicated. Daniel lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by his shirt. "I want my daughter back. She's all I got left." Marcus could have fought back. He was stronger, sober, prepared, but he chose restraint. "She's not a possession, Daniel. She's a little girl who deserves stability and safety. Things you never gave her." Tom, who'd been working in the back, appeared with his phone. "I've called the police," he said firmly. "They're on their way." Daniel released Marcus and stumbled backward, his bravado crumbling into something pathetic and broken. "I'm her father," he said again, but this time it was a sob. "I'm supposed to be her father." For a moment, Marcus felt something unexpected: pity. This man had lost everything to his demons, had destroyed the one precious thing he'd been given. "You could have been," Marcus said quietly. "But you chose the bottle instead. You chose violence. You left her to die in the rain." The police arrived minutes later, recognizing Daniel from outstanding warrants. As they led him away, he shouted over his shoulder, "This isn't over. She's my daughter." But Marcus knew it was over. Daniel would face charges for the old warrants, for violating the restraining order Marcus had obtained. He wouldn't be bothering them again for a long time, if ever. Still, when Elena came home from school that afternoon, Marcus sat her down and told her what had happened. He watched fear flicker across her face, watched her hands begin to shake. "Is he going to take me away?" she asked, her voice small. Marcus pulled her close, feeling her trembling against him. "No, sweetheart. Never. I promise you, I will never let anyone take you away from me. You're safe. You're home. And I will protect you with everything I have." Elena cried then, releasing fear she'd been carrying for 2 years, the nightmare that her past would come crashing back. Marcus held her until the tears subsided, until her breathing steadied, until she finally believed his promise. That night, he installed new locks on all the doors and windows and called in a favor from an old friend who owed him. For the next month, someone would always be watching the garage, making sure Daniel or anyone else didn't come back. Elena was his daughter in every way that mattered, and he would defend that with everything he had. As summer approached, Elena began talking about the future in ways that both excited and terrified Marcus. She had big dreams, wanted to be a doctor, or maybe an engineer, or perhaps a scientist who discovered new medicines. She'd check out books from the library on anatomy, physics, chemistry, consuming knowledge with an appetite that seemed insatiable. Marcus encouraged every dream, every ambition, but privately worried about how he'd ever afford to make them reality. College was expensive, medical school even more so. His mechanics income, while stable now, would never be enough. One evening, as they sat eating dinner, spaghetti with meat sauce, Elena's favorite, she looked up with those serious eyes. "Marcus, do you think someone like me can really become a doctor?" He set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "What do you mean, someone like you?" She hesitated. "Someone who came from where I came from. Someone whose real dad didn't want her. Someone who was almost homeless." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He tried so hard to build her confidence, to show her she was worthy of every dream, but the scars of her past ran deep. "Elena, listen to me," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Where you came from doesn't determine where you're going. Your past doesn't define your future. Your choices do. You're one of the smartest, most determined people I've ever met, at any age. If you want to be a doctor, you'll be a doctor. If you want to cure cancer or build rockets or whatever else catches your imagination, you'll do it. I believe that with everything I am." Tears welled in her eyes. "But how? We don't have money for college. I've heard the other kids talking about their college funds, about their parents saving for years." It was true, and Marcus wouldn't lie to her. "You're right. We don't have what they have. But you know what? That just means we'll have to work smarter. There are scholarships, grants, programs for students like you who excel against the odds. We'll figure it out together, one step at a time." He squeezed her hand. "Your job right now is to keep learning, keep growing, keep being exactly who you are. My job is to make sure you have the chance to do it. Deal?" Elena nodded, wiping her eyes, and Marcus saw determination replace doubt. That night, after Elena went to bed, Marcus sat at his makeshift desk and began researching. He learned about scholarship programs, about support for first-generation college students, about organizations that helped kids from difficult backgrounds. He made lists, contacted counselors, reached out to anyone who might offer guidance. It became his mission, his second job. During the day, he fixed cars. At night, he built pathways for Elena's future. He also made a decision that cost him more than money. His garage, the building his father had built with his own hands, sat on land that had appreciated significantly over the years. Developers had approached him before, offering sums that made his head spin. He'd always refused, clinging to his father's legacy. But legacies, he realized, could take many forms. His father would have wanted him to choose the future over the past, to invest in life rather than brick and mortar. So Marcus made calls, had the property appraised, began the process of exploring options. He wouldn't decide anything yet. Elena was still young, and opportunities might emerge he couldn't foresee. But he wanted to be ready, wanted to have ammunition when the time came to fight for her dreams. As he finally closed his laptop and prepared for bed, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not just for getting through tomorrow, but for building something lasting, something that would extend beyond his own life. Elena would have her chance. Whatever it took, however he had to sacrifice, she would have every opportunity to become whoever she wanted to be. That was his promise to himself, to her, and to the memory of his father who taught him that some things, like family, like love, like honor, were worth more than any possession. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Marcus was underneath a Honda Civic, wrestling with a stubborn bolt, when he heard Tom call out, "Boss? You might want to see this." The tone in Tom's voice made Marcus slide out from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag already black with grease. In the doorway of the garage stood a man who clearly didn't belong in this neighborhood. Expensive suit, polished shoes, an air of confidence and wealth that seemed almost alien in this modest space. Behind him stood two others, a woman in an equally expensive outfit carrying a leather portfolio, and a younger man with a camera around his neck. Marcus stood slowly, suddenly conscious of his stained work clothes, the grime under his fingernails, the smell of motor oil that permeated everything. "Can I help you?" he asked cautiously. The man in the suit stepped forward, his eyes scanning the garage with an expression Marcus couldn't read. "Are you Marcus Reed?" His voice was deep, controlled, the accent suggesting education and privilege. "That depends on who's asking," Marcus replied, not quite defensive but wary. People in suits usually meant trouble in his experience: collection agencies, lawyers, officials with forms and questions. The man pulled out a business card and handed it over. Marcus read the name: James Wellington, Wellington Industries. The name meant nothing to him. "I'm sorry, I don't," Wellington interrupted gently. "I'm looking for the man who rescued a little girl 2 years ago. A girl named Elena. Would that be you?" Marcus's blood ran cold. His first instinct was to protect Elena, to deny everything, to send these people away. Had Daniel sent them? Was this some legal maneuver to take her away? "Why do you want to know?" he asked, his voice harder now. Wellington seemed to sense his fear and raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Mr. Reed, I'm not here to cause trouble. Quite the opposite. Please, can we talk? What I have to say, you're going to want to hear this sitting down." Against his better judgment, Marcus led them to the small office at the back of the garage, gesturing to the worn chairs. Wellington sat with the grace of someone accustomed to boardrooms and luxury, seeming not to notice or care about the shabby surroundings. "Mr. Reed," he began, "2 years ago, my granddaughter disappeared. Elena Wellington. Her mother, my daughter Sarah, died of cancer, and her father, a man I never approved of, took custody. When Sarah died, I tried to find them, but Daniel had moved, changed numbers, cut off all contact. I hired investigators, but they'd vanished." Marcus felt the world tilt. Wellington? Elena's last name was Hartley, or so he'd thought. "I spent 2 years searching," Wellington continued, his voice heavy with emotion. 2 years not knowing if my granddaughter was dead or alive. Then, a month ago, my investigators found Daniel. He was in jail, and during questioning, he mentioned that someone had stolen his daughter 2 years ago. A mechanic in this part of town. "It took some time to track you down, Mr. Reed, but here I am." Marcus sat in stunned silence, processing this information. Elena was the granddaughter of James Wellington, billionaire industrialist? It seemed impossible. Wellington pulled out a photograph from his jacket pocket, a family portrait showing him, a younger woman with Elena's eyes, and a baby. "This is my daughter Sarah and Elena when she was 3 months old. Before everything fell apart. Before Sarah got sick and I lost them both." He looked at Marcus with eyes that held both pain and hope. "Mr. Reed, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Is my granddaughter safe? Is she happy?" The question hung in the air. Marcus thought of Elena, bright, thriving, loved. He thought of the life they'd built, the family they'd become. And he thought about what this man's arrival might mean, the power and resources he commanded, the legal weight he could bring to bear. "She's more than safe," Marcus said quietly. "She's home." Wellington's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, the billionaire facade crumbled, revealing just a grandfather who'd lost his family and desperately wanted it back. The next few hours were among the most difficult of Marcus's life. Wellington wanted to see Elena, wanted to verify she was well, wanted to, Marcus could see it in his eyes, take her back. He had lawyers, resources, every advantage. Marcus had love and 2 years of daily commitment, but he knew how the world worked. Money talked, and men like Wellington got what they wanted. When Elena came home from school, Marcus had prepared her as best he could in the 10 minutes they'd had alone. "There's someone here to see you. Your grandfather." Elena's face went pale. "I have a grandfather?" Marcus nodded. "Your mother's father. He's been looking for you for a long time." When Wellington saw Elena, he broke down completely. "She looked so much like Sarah," he said later, like having his daughter back for just a moment. Elena was polite but distant, not understanding who the stranger was or what he wanted. Wellington told her stories about her mother, showed her pictures, tried to build a bridge across 2 years of absence. "I want you to come home with me," Wellington said finally. "I have a big house with a room that's been waiting for you. You'll have everything you need, the best schools, tutors, whatever you want to study. You'll never have to worry about money or safety again. You'll be with family, Elena. Real family. Marcus felt his heart breaking as he watched Elena's face. She was 9 years old, being offered a fairy tale life. Wealth, opportunity, security beyond anything he could provide. How could he compete with that? How could he ask her to choose a mechanic's modest life over a billionaire's mansion? But then Elena did something that surprised everyone. She walked over to Marcus and took his hand. "I already have a family," she said quietly. "Marcus is my family. This is my home." Wellington's face fell. "Elena, I'm your grandfather. Your mother would have wanted us to be together. You deserve so much more than—" He gestured around the modest garage. "Then this." Elena's grip on Marcus's hand tightened. "Marcus saved my life. He takes care of me. He helps with my homework and makes me breakfast and tells me I can be anything I want. He's been there every single day for 2 years." "Where were you?" It was a child's blunt honesty, cutting through pretense and complication. Wellington looked stricken. "I didn't know where you were. If I had known, I would have come sooner." "But you didn't know," Elena said simply. "And Marcus found me anyway." The room fell silent. Wellington looked at Marcus, really looked at him for the first time. Not as an obstacle, but as a man who'd done what Wellington himself had failed to do, protected his granddaughter. "Mr. Reed," Wellington said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "I can see that you love her. I can see what you've built here. And I realize now that just because I can give her things doesn't mean I have the right to take her from the person who's been her father when she needed one most." He paused, seeming to come to a difficult decision. What if we found a different solution? What if we worked together instead of competing? Over the next weeks, they worked out an arrangement that would change all their lives. Elena would stay with Marcus. That was non-negotiable as far as she was concerned. But Wellington would be part of her life too, a grandfather who could offer opportunities, education, support. Wellington set up a trust fund for Elena's education, ensuring she could attend any college she wanted. He hired lawyers to strengthen Marcus's guardianship, making sure no one could ever challenge his rights again. He even helped Marcus expand the garage, turning it into a proper business that could support them comfortably. But more importantly, Wellington became family. He visited regularly, not as an interloper, but as a grandfather learning to know his granddaughter. He and Marcus developed a mutual respect, two men from different worlds united by love for the same remarkable child. Wellington learned humility from Marcus, understanding that wealth couldn't replace presence, that money couldn't buy back lost time. Marcus learned that accepting help wasn't weakness, that letting Elena have multiple people who loved her only made her stronger. Years later, when Elena graduated from medical school, top of her class, full scholarship, exactly as Marcus had always known she would, both men sat in the audience with tears streaming down their faces. She thanked them both in her speech, the mechanic who taught her that love meant sacrifice, and the grandfather who'd learned that family was about more than blood. She'd been saved twice, she said, once from the storm by Marcus, and once from a life defined by her trauma, by both men's willingness to put her needs above their own desires. Marcus still ran the garage, though now it was a thriving business that employed a dozen people and mentored disadvantaged youth from the neighborhood. Wellington Industries had started a foundation in Sarah's name, helping children from difficult circumstances access education and opportunity. And Elena, brilliant and compassionate, split her time between practicing medicine and working with the foundation, using her story to inspire others. The poor mechanic who'd rescued a dying girl had given her a life. The billionaire who'd come looking for him had learned what family truly meant. Together, they'd created something neither could have built alone, a family bound not by obligation or circumstance, but by choice, love, and the profound understanding that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we save in return. It was an ordinary miracle, the kind that happened when people chose compassion over convenience, when they saw another person's humanity and responded with their own. And in the end, wasn't that the only kind of rescue that truly mattered?